I'm Melissa Johnson. I am a professor of art history and visual culture at Illinois State University. I started teaching at ISU in 2004, so I've been there now for this is my 22nd year. Before that, I taught at a number of community colleges and schools out in Western Massachusetts. I was teaching art history before, and I got my PhD in art history at Bryn Mawr College outside of Philadelphia. Before that, I was an archivist, and I worked at Princeton University in the archives, working with the historical photograph collection. I went to undergrad at University of Michigan, majored in English and art history, although I started in music, and then got my library degree at the University of Michigan. So my career's been kind of not a straight road, which I think is actually something that's important to me because it helps to explain or contextualize why and how I do the work I do today, right? That it's not just one thing, but it's looking at a lot of different things and combining them together. I never really thought of myself as a maker. Although when I was a kid, I went to the Toledo Art Museum on Saturday mornings for art classes growing up, and I had a little studio in the basement, my own little corner. But in high school, I didn't do any art. I did all music. And when I got to college, I did English, well, music first, then English, and then added on art history, and thought of myself as more of an academic. But in 2006, I think, Jin Lee and I decided to learn how to knit. And so we took knitting lessons in Chicago. And that got me started back into thinking about making things and with my own hands. But knitting is not the way I think about knitting for myself. It's not art because I work with patterns and I follow patterns. But it wasn't until around 2016 that I started thinking about making in terms of embroidery, because around 2012, I started to shift my research focus from Hannah Hirsch, a German artist who was active with Berlin Dada, and changed it to looking at contemporary artists making work in response to the writing of Virginia Woolf. I saw Deanna Frydd's book, The Waves, at a gallery up in Chicago and thought, wow, there are artists making work about one of my favorite writers. And I taught Woolf's novel, The Waves, in a collage and montage class starting around 2008. But seeing Deanna's book started me thinking about shifting what I was looking at for my own research and writing about. And then as I started realizing that a lot of the artists I was interested in were working in textiles, and I didn't, aside from knitting and some embroidery as a kid, I didn't know that much about them. I started to do more research, and then I decided, because all of a sudden I was writing about living artists, not artists who were no longer living, I could talk to them and ask them questions. And I wanted to be able to talk to them with a sense of knowledge about what they were doing. And a kind of, for me, with textiles and embroidery, and weaving even, it's a real embodied knowledge. And so I started doing embroidery, and it just kind of blossomed out into something else with me making work in response to Virginia Woolf's writing. So it means that I read Woolf differently. I'm differently attuned to the way she writes because of making the text and textile pieces, right? I ended up that project I was working on during 2020 when I was writing about that play, because I was extracting phrases from Woolf and finding these patterns and these motifs and ways that she had of saying certain things. I was able to see something in that play that allowed me to come up with something make an entirely new connection that I would not have been able to do if I hadn't also been making, right? So it ends up being this what gets called today research creation as a way for both academics, writers, to integrate their writing with a studio practice, as well as studio people who are visual artists or creative artists in some way, making connections with doing research and bringing that, allowing the research to be a part of the work. And it's actually something that I teach in the textile class, and studio students love it because it gives them an entry into doing research, and research that makes sense to them, right?